To be able to do environment animation, you need to understand the connection between all the elements within your scene. Usually there's a single force, a character running through the scene, or an explosion or wind that affects everything similarly, but not equally. In After Effects, there really isn't a way to simulate this. However, there is a high-level concept that you can connect everything to one layer, one effect, one variable. And this concept is something I like to call the global variable. We're going to use expressions, connect everything to one layer of animation, and get ourselves a simulated environment. His artwork is by Ross Tran. It depicts Nima, a character he's been developing for some time. He's a fellow YouTuber. If you haven't seen his work, go check it out. It's entertaining and beautiful. All right, let's get into how to think about your environment in terms of a global variable. Looking at the artwork, we could already see that the wind is going from right to left based on the hair flowing upward and the cloth flowing upward as well. But that's not enough for us to understand where it's flowing in between each of these elements. And to make this easier to see, I'm just gonna add a white layer above everything and start drawing. Oh, and yes, I am gonna draw on the screen. The biggest, most important flow of the wind, I would say, is in between Nima and the foreground elements. So it looks something like this, coming from right to left and then flowing upward. So this movement is probably the most visible, the most important of wind. But to add interest to this, we want to see what happens to the wind when it goes behind Nima and also what happens over here. Because of the hair picking up, there's two things that are happening here. One, it's flowing and then kind of going across behind and then meeting back up with this other flow that's happening. But the other one is that I feel that because this gust of wind is so powerful and I'm picking up these elements, that there is actually some push up here and kind of doing this clockwise animation, pulling all these elements up. And this makes this so much more interesting of a flow because it means that we could have elements mimic this movement to simulate what this wind would actually do. Along with this, we have a cherry blossom up here at the top, and petals are going to be dropping off and joining these gusts or these flows of wind. So something like dropping down and then picking up by these elements, something like this. When you see the petals drop down and it's carried by this path, the eye will pick that up and understand that there's just wind flowing in this, and it feels almost natural to see that happen. I think that this is feeling really great. There's so much movement here. But there's nothing happening over here, and there really should be, since the artwork itself is asymmetrical, really heavy on the right, and nothing's happening on the left. So along with this pickup and this curling, we can introduce the same thing over here since there's so much space to do this. So while this stuff flows, we could introduce another set of particles that flow from here, follow this line, and then curl upward. And then eventually make its way, back out of the scene. Now, I realize that this could seem a bit complex, but really the takeaway here is that the wind is moving from right to left. And when it does that and it interacts with elements in your scene, something new happens, something changes, and it creates this turbulence in the air that makes for a visually interesting movement. Now, something to consider while wind is flowing through is what is happening in position to the flow of the wind. We have grass down here, and the grass that's beneath this wind wants to follow where the wind goes. And to do that, it would have to rotate towards the direction it's heading. So it needs to rotate this way, counterclockwise, for any elements that are beneath the wind. But elements above it, like these leaves, all this stuff, any of these vines that are up here, these have to rotate clockwise, just like the hair, because it is being picked up from underneath. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into After Effects and start animating. Okay, I've already gone through and broke up all the assets, imported them into After Effects, and set it up in a way that makes sense for me. Now, I'm gonna cover the concept around environment animation. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the individual steps. I think if you understand the concept, then you could apply this to whatever artwork you have. I've also already gone through and animated Nima here, her hair, her cloth, and the little tassels that she has. If you're interested in how to do this, I already made another tutorial on hair animation that covers this exact same topic. So the first step here that we need to do is create our global variable, the one value that is going to be applied to everything, our wind value. What I tend to do is look for the one item, the one thing in the scene that I believe is the most important or the most eye-catching. And for me, in this scenario, I believe it's her hair. I think her hair is basically the star of the show. So that is what I'm going to use to be able to generate or create my global variable animation. This already has, the hair animation and the pickup and drop off from the wind. So we're gonna create that from scratch, and then I'm gonna show you how to connect everything. What I have here is a null and then a pre-rendered image sequence of the hair that I've already animated. Just looking at the hair, you can see that the animation is flowing, but it's not being picked up or dropping off. So we're gonna create this by using its rotation. When animating this, what I like to do is do an up, down, and then up even higher, down slightly, and then back to the normal spot. This is a very typical way of animating. If you're an animator, you usually have variance in your movement. So going right into it, I'm gonna use my initial hair movement here and use that as my guide for how I want the rotation to happen. Click my rotation value here and go forward and just start literally just animating this. So I'm gonna move this slightly up, then it's gonna come slightly, down, and then pick back up again. And then it's gonna kind of get to this point, and then drop down slightly. All right, and then keep on going down a little bit more. And then now it's gonna pick up over here. So let's see what we got so far. So it goes down, it's gonna pick back up, down, and then I want this next up to be like a really far up. So boom, cool, down, moves up. I think this move up is too much. There, move up, and then kind of down, and then go all the way up. Yeah, and I think that this could last for longer, and then eventually drop back down. Cool, and then go back to where it needs to be. Now, if I go to the graph editor for this, you'll see this is like my terrible looking curve, but this is exactly the values that I need to be able to create this global variable. So I'm gonna go ahead and soften everything up, adjust a few things here. I could tell that this is a bit too crazy here. I'm gonna move all of these values down. All right, get that over there. I could get another key here. All right. And really, like, what I'm trying to get is, it goes up slightly, goes back down, and it goes down probably the furthest that it will ever go down here, and then make its way back up again. I'm gonna delete this key, don't need it. Something like this. So let's see what this looks like. So it drops down, picks up, and that pickup is a little early. It drops down, picks back up, goes down a little bit, and then goes all the way up. Now this all the way up could be even more intense. So it drops down, picks up, goes down, and then picks up a lot, and then drops down again, and back to normal. Okay, this should do it. We could keep these animated keys here, but personally, I like to take these values and put it into a slider. This to me is cleaner because I know that I'm gonna be connecting a lot of values to this same slider over and over again, rather than the rotation of the hair. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a new null. Okay, and I'll call this, maybe global variable. And then add a expressions slider on it. and then cut and paste the rotation values to the slider. There we go. I'm going to move the null out of the way, and let's change the slider to wind. So obviously it's not attached, so we have to attach this these values back to the hair or the null that I have it connected to. So all I'm going to do is just get this pig whip and select that slider, and now it has that rotation back on it. Yay! All right, so we have a global variable and a wind slider, but how exactly does that affect everything in the scene? Well, first we'll open up a few items, a few layers, and apply those values directly to those layers through expressions. Once we're happy with that, then we'll apply it to the rest of the scene and get our simulated environment. Back in After Effects, I've gone through and adjusted the curve that was here before. I just wanted to smooth it out just a bit more because we're dealing with wind here. And I also added in a loop, so a loop from before and after through expressions. Nothing super complex, but I'm using basically loop in and loop out with an if statement. That way the value of this will just loop indefinitely before and after. With these values all set, I've also introduced a few new layers. These layers are the ones that I want to animate first before moving into the rest of the scene. Here it's a vine, some leaves and a shred of grass. And I've purposely chosen these three because one starts all the way to the right, one starts kind of in the center, and the last one is towards the end. That way we could see how the wind hits this element first, then this second, and then third. It is kind of hard to see all this, so what I'll do is I'll reveal everything and then add a white layer underneath those layers that we're going to be working with. That way it'll just be easier to see. And let's drop the opacity. Let's start with this first one, this first element, which is the vine. I've moved the anchor point to the bottom because we're going to use the global variable values to be able to animate this back and forth. So let's get right into it. I'm going to go ahead and alt-click the rotation so that we enable the expressions here. And then I'm going to go ahead and pig whip the wind variable that we created. If we just let this play, so it's pushing it really far to the left, and I believe it's going the opposite direction that we need. When I write expressions, I tend to like to give variables to everything. That way it's easier to read what's happening. This is our wind, our global variable. So I'm going to go ahead and call this force. You could name this whatever you want, but I prefer to just give it a simple name, force. And we have to drop this down here, force. Right now, the rotation is added to it. So if I turn this off, you can see that there's a negative 7.3 here. That's from our animation. The default, the first key is actually 7.3. So we need to remove that first so that when we add this expression, it doesn't automatically rotate this vine. We have force as our value, but then let's add another one. Let's call it offset. And offset is going to be basically the offset that turns the value from the starting point to 0. That way, anything that we animate, it won't affect the initial position or rotation of our layer. So we know that it's negative 7.31. We're going to subtract offset to our force. So offset. When we do this, notice that this has gone back to 0, and if I turn this off and on, the rotation here does not change because we have effectively removed the initial value from our wind. All right, we need the value of this wind to go the right direction. When the hair drops down, that means that the wind has loosened up. It's not as powerful anymore. It's not picking up our hair. And because of that, that means that our animation, our vine here should be going to the right, not to the left. So we need to go ahead and add a value that would make it go the opposite direction. I personally like to use amp for amplify. This is how I would use the power of our wind and multiply it to amplify how strong our wind should be. So here, I'm just gonna multiply it by -1, which means it will shoot it the other direction. And I'm gonna go ahead and put parentheses around the force and offset so that it doesn't multiply just one of these values, it multiplies both of these after the offset has been calculated. So there times amp. Okay, so notice that it is shooting it the other direction, which is exactly what we want. We want the wind, when it loosens up, for the wind to go to the right, and when it's blowing really hard, then it's going to the left. So over here, it's going to the left because the wind is picking this up. That looks right to me. And I can already tell that the wind, the power of the wind is too strong for our vine. So let's go ahead, instead of making this -1, let's make this -0.4. It's going to take 40% of the value of our overall wind value and apply it to our vine here. Okay, so it is pushing to the right, to the left, and then goes back up. I think this is a good amount of power, the amount of wind that's affecting this vine. The last thing I want to do is make it so that the vine gets hit by the wind before the hair. To do this, we need to introduce a new variable and a new way of grabbing the value. Force is our global variable, and that's the value that we're taking from, but I don't want the value of where it is currently in the time head. I want it at an earlier time. So how you write this is you put a period and put value at time, and then parentheses, and inside of the parentheses, you tell After Effects through expressions where you want to grab the value from. If I were to just put time, then this would be the exact same as just force by itself. But because we are able to control where we want this value, I'm gonna add in a new value here, plus, and then put 0.2. Actually, let's put 0.5. This means I want the value of wherever the playhead is plus a half a second ahead. So what you'll see is that the vine moves first to the right and then the hair moves down because it's being affected, a half a second earlier. And then it moves back and then the hair gets picked up. So this is doing what we want, but I think that this is a bit too early. So let's change this value and actually give it a variable. I personally like to call this delay, and we will make it 0.2. So this will increase the time by 0.2. Delay. There we go. Let's also close this out. All right. That's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and play. This is great. You can see that the vine is being affected first and then the hair just right after it. All right, moving forward. This is like the special sauce. This has everything that we need to make the rest of this scene work for us. The first 4 lines are what we're gonna change the most often in this expression. The bottommost line, the force dot value at time, that entire line is like the calculation of all of our variables above. So as we take this expression, we could copy and paste it, put it into any property that we want, and we'll just continue to change the variables up top to give us the customization we need per property. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this and paste it on our last item, which is the grass. Notice that I've already put the anchor point at the bottom. I'm gonna go to the rotation, alt click it, paste, but this time I want to change the delay to not be ahead of time, but be behind in time. So I'm gonna make it -0.7 instead. And let's see how this looks. Okay, this is looking pretty great. The only thing is that the power of this needs to be increased. I think 0.4 works well for this first one just because it's a bigger item, but this last grass piece, it's delayed quite a bit and it just needs to be more amplified. And to do this, I'll just go in here and change this to, let's say, 0.8. So we've doubled the value of the grass. And I want to change the delay to, let's say, -0.6. So it's not as delayed as before. This is looking great. Now let's apply it to the blue leaf that's more centered. And this one's gonna be a little bit different than the other two because with rotation, you're dealing with essentially one value or a single value. And in position, we're gonna be dealing with 2 values. That's represented by the X and the Y. And there's a different way that we have to write this for values like this. So I will go ahead and hit paste here. And if I were just to let this go, it won't work because it doesn't know what the other value is. It believes that we're only trying to turn this equation into a singular value rather than two. What I mean by that is when you're dealing with position or anything that has multiple values, you need to account for both values. And both values are represented by these brackets with a comma in between the values. So this represents X, this represents Y. And you need to have values for this. So for instance, if I were to put 0, 0 here and let this calculate, it would work and turn both my values to 0, 0. And because of this, we need to introduce two values for every single one of these values that we have introduced up here. So for this offset, I'll go ahead and add the brackets, the comma, and I'm going to copy and paste this so that it's the exact same value for both of the X and Y values. For amplify, do the exact same thing. So copy, paste. I'll do the same here. There we go, but that's not all. If we were to let this go, it still doesn't know how to deal with this because our equation here needs to be able to handle dual or double values. Because we've introduced these double values like this, we need to account for them here. So I'm going to split this up into two values of their own. I'll call this temp X. And for temp X, what we're trying to do is calculate what the X value will be only. There's a way to access each of these values. Since there's two values here, there's a way to access just the X values and let them calculate on their own. Looking at this line of code down here, the 0, 0, this represents the X, like we said before, the X position, and this represents the Y position. But another way to access these positions is actually using numbers. To illustrate this, I'm going to go ahead and grab one of these values up here. Let's go ahead and grab amp. And I'm going to go ahead and comment this out so this one doesn't calculate. This double / doesn't allow for After Effects to calculate this. And I'm going to go ahead and put brackets and put a number inside of the brackets. Having amp be next to these brackets is telling After Effects that I am looking for a specific value within amp. And the value positions in here are through numbers. So the first position is actually represented by 0. So if I were to copy this and paste this in here and in here, I'm telling After Effects to only use the first value here, 0.8. And let me change this so it's easier to read this. I'm gonna make this -0.3. I am telling After Effects to only use amp's first value for both the X and the Y position. Now, if I were to let this do it, both the X and the Y are going to equal this first position because of this. But if I were to change this to the next position, which is 1, move this over to 1, 1, then it's only going to take the values from the second position, which is -0.8. So it is giving me back -0.8 for both X and Y. If I had even more values in here, let's say I have like 1, 4, 7. If I had all these values, I can tell After Effects to take any of these values based on what number I put in here. So let's say I want to grab this 4 over here. Then the position that it's at is, let's see, 0, 1, 2, 3. It's 3. So if I put 3 and 3, then I should get back 4. So this represents the position. With that as the position, I'm gonna go ahead and kill this and now come back here. With understanding position, we can tell After Effects how to find what position for X and for Y. With delay, we want the X position, which in this case is just 0. And then with offset, same thing, 0. Amplify, that is 0. And this should give us our X value. But what we need is the Y value as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy this, paste it beneath, turn this to our Y value, and then change every single one of these numbers to the second position, which happens to be 1. And then the last thing we need to do is tell After Effects that I want to use the temp X for the X position and temp Y for the Y position. So I'm gonna put in my brackets and I'm gonna place in here temp X and temp Y. With this, you can see that the values work, there's no errors that are produced. The layer is all the way up here because there's one last step that we're missing in this, which is to re-add these values. If I turn this off, you can see these values here. We need to re-add these back to the leaf. And to do this, it's pretty simple. We're just gonna come over here and put value plus the rest. And there we go. Now we have ourselves an animated, well-connected, working leaf animation here. We can see our movement right now. Obviously, these numbers that I placed here were kind of arbitrary and we should use the right values. The key thing that we need to do here is have this leaf animate in between these two. So the wind's gonna hit the vine first and then the leaf second and the grass last. So let's get a value that's in between that and then adjust the amplitude values. So looking at the amplitude values, I'm gonna remove all the extra values so that we only have the two that we're working with. And for amplify, I actually want the X position to be more amplified than the Y. Let's go ahead and change this to 1 for now. And then for the Y position, I actually want this to be a positive so that it's moving downward when the wind picks up. And I'll only put this to like 0.2. And then for the delay, -6 is where the grass is currently. So let's make this maybe -3 and see what we get. I like how this turned out. The vine is moving first, then the blue leaves, and then the grass. And I think there's one more thing that I'd like to adjust, which is the rotation of the blue leaves. So it looks like the wind is turning it over slightly. I'm just gonna grab what was previously there for the grass and then use similar values for rotation for the blue leaves. So I'm gonna reveal the blue leaves. I'll click the rotation, paste the expression, and then change the delay to be closer to the delay that we see for the position, but I'm gonna make it slightly more of a delay. And then last, I'm gonna drop, actually, I think that this will work. Let's see this in action. All right, the rotation's part of it, and this is perfect. This is exactly what I'm looking for, and I think we've nailed the 3 elements in here. I wanted to jump into particle creation and how the global variable is going to affect particles within your scene. Here I'm using particular. It's my particle system of choice. I've already gone through and animated the particles. It's a very simple animation here. I have a few particles being created from the beginning, starting off with only 4 particles at a time and then dying out over the course of this looping animation. What we need here is for the wind to react to these particles so it looks like it's in this scene. And right now there is some interesting movement, but there isn't that interplay with the wind itself. And it's relatively simple to connect these just like the other ones. We're gonna go ahead and add the expressions directly to this effect. To do this, I'm gonna go to our grass layer and reveal our expressions and grab this expression from here, and then go to this layer that has the effect on it and find my wind variable inside of here. Particular already has an X and Y wind, so it's kind of doing some of the work for us, but we're gonna have to incorporate our expression in here so we can see that react. Let's go ahead and alt click the wind X and then paste the expressions into here. I know that the wind that we want here is pretty powerful. We want this to really react since it is floating items with literally in the wind. So to do this, let's go ahead and increase the amplitude and remove the delay, making it so that there's no delay here. So I'm gonna put the delay to 0, and then I'm gonna change the amplitude to, I still believe it's a negative number. Let's go ahead and put it to negative, let's say -20. And the other thing, since we didn't add this before, I want to make sure that this also has the values that I've already predefined here. So I'm just going to add a value back to it. Let's see what we get. Yes. Oh man, yeah. So it's picking up, it's slowing down, it's speeding up. Like this is all happening within these particles. This is the type of look that we need for this to feel like a entire environment. Everything is being affected by this wind. This is what we're looking for from these particles, but I want the blossoms to also fall a bit more, as if the wind isn't carrying it and gravity is taking over. So to do this, I'm gonna go ahead and grab this expression, go to the wind Y and hit paste. And this one, I'm gonna drop down the amount here to, let's say 5 for now, and see how this looks. This means that the wind is gonna really push it down in this process. All right, it's pretty obvious that's pushing it down just a bit too much. So let me switch this back to, let's put it to 2 instead and see how this turns out. All right, this is feeling pretty nice. I think this is a good starting point for the particles. Now, to make these feel like there's finesse to them, of course, we're gonna have to add a few more particle systems and manipulate how the loop is animating here, as well as maybe introducing like an animated path to get the curling that we want from the end. But this is essentially applying the global variable to everything. Because everything is connected, everything isn't, a baked animation. Afterwards, we could adjust everything on the fly. I can't tell you how powerful, how important this is in production, when by the end of your animation, you realize that something was wrong, and then you have to go back and reanimate all of your layers. Maybe you need something to speed up or slow down. This will all be handled within this one global variable that was created. And to illustrate this, I'm gonna go ahead and open up the global variable and show you what this looks like if we were to adjust this curve now after the fact. Everything is dynamic, so that means that if I were to come to any of these values and adjust it, we should see this update across all these elements. So let's say I want this to be more amplified. Notice how everything is being adjusted all together. That's the beauty of this global variable. This has saved me so much time in my own production. And so with this setup, although it does take more time to get it up and running and going, you can depend on this setup to save you time later on. You're probably wondering by now, do I really have to put this expression on every single layer inside of my composition to get this animated environment? Well, the short answer is yes, and it does take time. At least that's what I would normally say. So it's taken me some time to get this video out because I've been in development of a new script that will solve this problem. With the ease of clicking one button, boom, everything is connected to your global variable. And I'm excited to show it. So let me get into what the script has to offer. It's also free, and it will be linked in the description down below. Full disclosure, I wasn't originally planning on releasing this to the public. I was developing this for my own needs, and as I was going down the development rabbit hole, I realized how beneficial this could potentially be for the motion graphics community. So I'm offering this up for free. Just keep in mind, this is in early development. There most likely is bugs or certain things that aren't working with it. And I can't exactly support this or fix bugs after releasing this. You may have noticed this window up here, sitting here this whole time, which is a core set of scripts that I use to help me with our global variable, to help me connect all of these elements together and give us the expressions. If you look at this, it's just a launch pad for all the different scripts that I've been developing. You could add more scripts to this list by going to the settings, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about delay. So AFPDelay is the script that will let us connect all of these elements to our global variable. I want to go ahead and animate a cluster of leaves over here. I'm going to go for the pink leaves that's in this environment and just start animating with the script. To do this, I'm going to go inside of foliage, comp, and in here it has each of the different sets of leaves broken up already. And I'm gonna go inside of the pink leaves comp, and in here I have all of these separated into their own layer. There's 54 layers of these pink leaves. And to run the script, I'm gonna select everything that I want to apply the global variable to, and then hit my AFPDelay script. This handy dandy window is what will allow us to attach everything to that global variable. First off, it'll tell you what you have selected. So here we have 54 layers selected. If you have properties selected, then it will also indicate that here, you could connect this to any effect property or, puppet pin or whatever, and this will just showcase what you have selected. Next up is the property driver. So this is the force that we're going to be connecting to. So this is it's asking us what is our global variable. So I'm going to go ahead and select this and then make my way out to the comp that has our global variable that we set up earlier in this video, select it, and then put OK. Now it's asking, hey, which of the values do you want to use? And this is a singular value, so it's fine to have it check marked only in this first box. But if this was position, then the next box would open up and it'll ask you which of the values you want. You could have the X, the Y, or both. And then because we've only selected layers and not the layer properties, we didn't select rotation, we didn't select position, we only selected the layer. So it's asking us, hey, you have layer selected, which property do you want to apply the expression to? And in this case, I wanted to affect our position property, so I'll keep it there. And I won't talk about the options just yet. I'll just go ahead and hit add. When I add it, a few things happens. One, it's going through each of these layers, and I'm gonna hide this for a second. It's going through every single one of these layers and adding an expression to it. If I expand this, you'll notice that this is very similar to the expression that we were building earlier in this video. It's a similar setup, a little bit more complex because of functionality reasons. I'll get into that in a bit, but you'll notice that we have our delay variable that has the brackets because this is affecting the position property. So we see both of the variables here, as well as the offset. Notice our -7.3 here with a crazy amount of numbers. It's super precise, which is, I guess, a good thing. And then we have our equation with the two properties broken up for the X and the Y. Well, when you launch and use this AFPDelay, it will automatically launch the editor right afterwards, the second script that's here. And what this is every single one of these layers, all of the properties that you've selected to apply the global variable to, they're all here. So you don't have to go copy and paste and adjust all of the variables within the expressions. You could just do that directly in here. So to show this, here's our first layer, pleaf_1. And here are the values for it. Here are the values for it. And if I were to change this to, let's say, like 3, delay it by 3, notice that this changed to 3 automatically and the leaf moved over here. So I'm going to put that back down to 0. So this is a really quick way to edit all of the values that we want for everything in this scene. Now, before I get into editing values, I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to show you how the editor works. If you hit the editor by itself as is, it's going to go through every single layer within this composition and look for this delay expression. If it finds it, then it will build out a complete list of all of the layers that has the AFP delay on it. But if I select layers or properties, specific ones, and hit the editor, it will only load the ones that I have selected. But in this case, I want to affect all of them because I am now applying the values I want from the global variable to everything at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and load all of them in here. Now, there are two sections in here. One is the global adjustments and the other one is the delay properties. The delay properties has all the layers in here. I have a button in here so you could just select these individually if you want to go see where they're at or what they're doing. I also have all of the variables here that we could adjust manually. But then I also have this global adjustments up top that lets us change all of these at the same time. For instance, if I go ahead and let this animate, you'll notice that the animation is there. This is our global variable affecting the X and the Y equally. But in this case, I want the X to be more powerful than the Y because the wind is coming from the right and heading to the left, not going from down up. So in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change some of these controllers so that it will change all of these in my favor. I want this overall, I'm trying to adjust my amplitude, and I want it to set all of my layers to set the amplitude to whatever values I have in here. So I'll put this to 1 and then let's say 0.2. When I do this, it won't let me run this because I haven't selected which layers I want to apply this to. I could either select them individually or select this button right here and I'll select everything. If I select everything or select these individually, it highlights the value that I am planning to change if I were to hit the run button here. Notice that the brackets next to the amplitude for all the layers are highlighted with the brackets being pink. If I hit run now, everything will change. All of these changed from 1 and 0.2. And notice that only the X is the most visible animation right now. The Y, it's really subtle, but it's there. It's at 0.2 currently. Well, that's not all. We want to be able to manipulate the delay of this, and we want it so that it's changing or hitting, the wind is hitting these elements from right to left over time. So we need to delay these over time. So I'm gonna switch this to delay, and I'm gonna go inside of here, and in this dropdown, instead of affecting all the same amount, there's a few other things that we could do here to change how to affect these globally. So I'm gonna switch this to cascading from top down. And what this means is that it's gonna take whatever values I have here and apply it to the first layer, and then add on top of that with the same value over and over again in a cascading order. So if this is 1, then this will be 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. So in this case, I want to make it so that it feels like it's blowing from right to left. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a negative number here, and I'm gonna make this like negative 0.02. And do the same on the other one, negative 0.02, and then hit run. When I run this, what will happen is it will start with that number on the first one and then add to it and keep on adding up to it. And if you look over here, we're getting our effect happening over time as if the wind is coming from the right first and then heading to the left. And notice how we were able to achieve this within a few seconds rather than having to go through this and go to every single layer and add these individually. If I just go to these right now, you'll see it's just the expression on each of these with the slight change of delay on every single one of these that is affected from our global variable. Now there is more that we can do with this. I showed you that there were other drop-down items like random, and there's custom and custom cascading. Custom will give us a really interesting result, because what I'm finding here is that when we animate this, it is animating from right to left, but it's affecting the elements. Notice how you're seeing a ripple run up this, and although that's an interesting effect, it's not exactly what we're looking for. Instead, we want it to feel like it's really coming from over here and heading this direction rather than coming from the bottom and moving its way up. And the reason why it's doing this is because of the ordering of the layers in here. It's ordered from bottom up, so the animation is being affected or is affecting this from bottom up. So instead of using just cascading top down, I'm gonna use custom all. And what this does is it introduces a new controller for us, a new graph that lets us have really fine tuning on how we want all this stuff to be affected. In here, the graph represents all these layers down here from top down. It starts over here and makes its way all the way to the end. And so that means that all the values from the top will hold whatever's here, and all the values at the bottom will hold these values up here. So if I were to change this to -1 and -1 and hit run, then the values that it's gonna start with is 0, and then the last layer at the bottom is gonna be -1. And look at this, it's already helping us with how the values are being affected, and we're still getting that ripple coming up this, but it is giving us a very fine-tuned, very specific result based on these values. Well, as part of this is a Bezier curve, so we could change how these are being affected over time. Now, I want these to be affected sooner, more often than at the beginning. So to do this, I'm gonna go ahead and make this Bezier curve go up slightly, so it looks like it's equal from here, but then gets affected faster once it gets to the center of this curve. So if I hit run, now you're seeing this be manipulated similarly over here. I think we could actually increase this a bit more, something like this, and I could probably curve this down a little bit more and hit run. Great, now it's kind of giving us a more equal amount in this area. I think we could probably make this go down a little bit more. And the other thing that I want to talk about is there's this button here that allows us to choose a point at which we want everything to animate to. So right now it's animating in order from our layering stack. So P-leaf1 is going to animate first, this second, third, and so on and so forth. If I click on this button, what it's going to do is it's going to add another layer over here. I'll stop this for a second. It's going to add a new layer here with a point controller on it. And this point controller, wherever I place this, any item that is closest to this will animate first. So to illustrate this, if I put this up here, let's say I put it right here and I hit run. What it's going to do is it's going to animate these items first. It's going to animate from the top down. Notice how this is animating first and this last. Well, that's because of where I place this point. So if I were to place this point somewhere else, let's say I put this, let's put it in the center. If I put it in the center, then it's going to animate from the middle first and make its way outward, almost like an explosion heading outward. There we go, and I'll hit run. And this is animating first, and then these are animating second. So in this case, what we want to do is have it so that it's animating from over here. Since we want the wind to go from right to left, we're going to go ahead and put this point all the way over here. That way, we could feel the wind hitting this first and making its way that way, and hit run. And let's see this thing in action. Now, what I'm noticing is that the amplitude is actually going the wrong direction, and we need to change all of these to the opposite direction because the wind picks up over here. Remember how it's really strong in this area? Well, that means that all of these elements need to go that direction, need to go left, not right. So to change this, I'm gonna go ahead and go to set all, and instead of actually set, I'm gonna change this to multiply. And I'm gonna affect my amplitude, and I will multiply all of these values by the negative number, except for actually the y. I'm gonna multiply all of the values down here by negative number and not do anything with this one. Actually, I'll put nothing in this one and then hit run. And what it will do is it will multiply all these by negative, and you'll see that all of this changed, and now it's going the opposite direction. All right, this is looking pretty cool. Now, I want to add in one more global variable to this, a second global variable. And the reason why is that I think that this is gonna look really nice in terms of being affected by the wind. But of course, there's gonna be some sort of level of noise associated with the wind. And I want all of these elements to feel that noise. So let's add another variable to this stack and then see it all together. So to do this, I'm gonna go ahead and lock this guy and then select everything and hit delay again. I'm gonna go ahead and select a property, and I've already created a noise slider here. This just has a wiggle on it. This is what that wiggle looks like. It just goes up and down. There's nothing too special about it. It's just a looping wiggle. So I'm gonna select this noise slider as my property that I want to follow, and I wanna apply it to the position and then hit add. And then when it adds, it's gonna add the noise to every single one of these layers. It adds it to the expression down here, and it's gonna add to this stack. Right now, it has noise on everything, so if I just run this, you can see that the noise is being affected or is affecting all of these all together and all at once. So we need to adjust that noise so it affects each of these leaves individually. And to do this, I'm gonna go inside of here, and you'll notice that a new tab has been introduced. Here is our global variable wind, and this is now my new slider, which is called noise, over here as a tab. When I select this, it will load up all of the expressions here, and it will look for another target inside of the expression. And once it finds it, it adds it to that list. Okay, so when we hit animate, we want this to only affect the position, but only the X position, just like we're affecting only the X position a lot and the Y a lot less. So let's do the same over here. I'm gonna go ahead and go to amplify, select all the properties, and then change the amplitude of the X to 0.5, and then the Y to 0.2, and then hit run. Okay, now we're seeing the noise here. It's pretty subtle. There's not a lot happening here, and I think that's okay for right now. But the issue is that they're all running at the same time together. And what we need is for these to have a random effect when it comes to noise. So to do this, I'm gonna go to my delay. I want this to choose a value that is random within an 8-second time frame, because this is how long I have the looping wiggle. So I'm gonna go up here and choose 8 and 8 for 8 seconds and change this to random. It's gonna do a random number between 8 seconds and then hit apply. There you go. Now we got ourselves a random effect where it's randomly affecting all of these elements on their own. Now, this almost looks a little bit too intense. They're kind of like floating and doing their own thing a bit too much. So instead of just doing that, we will also turn down the amplitude a little bit for both the X and the Y. So I'll go back to amp, go to multiply, and do a set or a multiply all. And I'm gonna make this, let's say 0.7.7 and hit run. And I actually think the Y is still too much. I probably want to turn down the Y a bit more. So I'm gonna go to set. I'll remove the amplitude in the X and turn the Y. Let's make that just 0.08 for everything. All right, I want to add a rotation to this as well so that it's being affected in the position and rotation of these leaves. So I'm gonna go and select everything again, hit delay, choose my global variable property. So go out here, go to our global variable, put OK, and then I want to apply this to rotation instead and put add. Now it's gonna go through and add all these to the rotation property. There we go. And select all these. I'm gonna turn the amplitude for all of these to, let's say like 0.5. And then I want to make the delay similar to what the other delay for the position is. So I'm gonna go to custom all and change this to -0.5 and hit run. Let's see this in action. Okay, so we're seeing the rotation happen, but it looks like it needs to go the opposite direction in amplify. So I'm gonna go to amplify, set all, and then I'm gonna change this to, oh look, -5, yes. There we go. Now we're really seeing a rotation happen. Very cool. So now it's affected, everything is part of this. We're seeing that rotation, we're seeing all this put together. Let's see it all together with the entire scene as we have it. So let's go back out and go to our Nima and let's see all these elements flowing together. Okay, it looks great. I totally forgot that we changed the amplify of this curve to be really high and intense. That's why we're getting a really strong blowing action over here. But everything is connected, so we can go ahead and just move these back down and it will affect everything in our scene just like before. So we could keep this down here and now we can see everything in action with that adjustment. All that's left to be done is to go through all of our pre-comps layers that we want to attach to our global variable, repeat the steps that we did here with the pink leaves, and then get our simulated environment. Of course, the global variable concept can be used for so many things outside of your environment. I've used it for character animation, rigging, cloth, even text layer updates. Really, the application of this is universal and wide open. So I'm really curious to see how you take this and how you evolve this concept. Send me any examples you have, I'd love to see it. If you have any questions about the script or about the way I work, please leave a comment down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And as always, thanks for watching.